Astonishing Legends Network.
Listen to the Astonishing Junk Drawer exclusively at patreon.com/astonishinglegends.
We are back. Forrest, say hello to everybody.
Please welcome Mr. Ryan Mangini to the stage.
I saw an apparition at our ranch growing up, and I see this black being, like blacker than the night itself.
Did you feel like under the influence of anything?
I felt like I was being attacked.
Nobody came out. Nobody else. No neighbor saw that.
It's almost like people want to believe that they're entangled.
Everything's attracted to the light. Even the darkness is attracted to the light. They want to see what's going on.
Tonight's episode of Astonishing Legends is dedicated to our dear friend, Mark Langan.
Mark originally reached out to us back in 2019 because he was listening to our series on the Bet Sphere.
Yeah, it turns out he was an incredibly talented artist with a particular expertise in creating amazing three-dimensional artwork and sculptures using corrugated cardboard. And he was a big deal. I mean, there's articles about him in The Guardian. His Instagram handle is Corrugate, CORRUG8, the number 8. A lot of people have taken notice of his work.
Well, and he had a full 2-page spread in the middle, the centerfold of Ripley's Believe It or Not book. Which
that's right. He sent me a copy of that. I have it downstairs.
We got a copy.
Yeah.
No, he was a very generous and conscientious and kind and loving guy, and he sent us copies of the book. And I said, I don't see any other entry for anyone else in this book that got a full 2-page spread. So congratulations to him on that.
Yeah, and he was so good at it, we commissioned a piece from him for our original Astonishing Legends logo, the first version of Astonishing Owl, which hangs on the wall here in my studio in North Carolina. And it's amazing. It's huge. It's like 1.5 feet across by 1.5 feet. I love it. I'll post a picture of it before this episode goes up.
Well, it's part of the Astonishing Legends Museum, I think now. It's just a central piece. And another really special moment, his brother-in-law, Don, helped him come see us in person at Monster Fest a few months ago, in spite of a terminal illness. And it was really wonderful to connect with him.
And he was in a great mood, by the way. He was very at peace. And he made it clear, though, that we probably wouldn't see him again. And that was a very sobering moment for us. But he seemed at peace. So we just wanted to dedicate tonight's episode to his memory and send our love and prayers out to his family. He will be sorely missed.
Astonishing Legends would like to thank Zocdoc, Squarespace, Mint Mobile, our contributors at patreon.com, and you, our listeners, for making tonight's show possible.
On March 3rd of 1876, Mrs. Allen Crouch of Rankin, Kentucky, was outside her home making soap on a clear day when chunks of what appeared to be fresh, raw meat fell from the sky, landing all over her property and beyond its borders. She was experiencing what would later be dubbed the Kentucky phenomenon by none other than the godfather of all things strange, Charles Fort. These days, it's called the Great Kentucky Meat Shower. It was a bizarre, astonishing legend of its own that has defied an easy scientific explanation for 147 years. But here's the twist. This wasn't an isolated incident. Across America, throughout the 19th century, reports of bloodfalls and meat showers peppered the landscape like some kind of macabre red rain. From the plains of Texas to the urban parts of New Jersey, from California gold fields to what, at the time, were plantations in the South, the skies occasionally turned red with unexplained showers of blood, flesh, and assorted bits of internal organs. For example, a farmer in North Carolina watched in horror as blood spattered across his tobacco field. A group of soldiers in California ducked for cover as chunks of meat rained down on their barracks. A family in Iowa gathered around their breakfast table when suddenly their yard was dotted with clots of blood and unidentifiable tissue. Like all legends, there's a lot more to these events than the simple description of what happened. Their details are windows into the fears, beliefs, and scientific understanding of a nation that, at the time, was in flux. Some saw divine judgment, others suspected elaborate hoaxes. Scientists proposed theories ranging from vomiting buzzards to atmospheric phenomena, while newspapers spread the stories far and wide, captivating readers with tales of the inexplicable. But what really happened during these bloodfalls and meat showers? Were they all connected or separate phenomena with similar descriptions? And why did they seem to stop abruptly at the turn of the 20th century? Tonight, we're joined by Tom Maxwell, an expert on Bloodfalls and the author of 2 fascinating essays on this very subject. Together, we'll peel back the layers of these grisly events, exploring not just what fell from the sky, but what these incidents reveal about 19th century America, its people, its science, and its struggle to make sense of a rapidly changing world. From supernatural omens to scientific puzzles, from sensational headlines to forgotten footnotes in history, this is the strange, bloody, and captivating story of America's blood-red reign of terror.
Welcome back to Astonishing Legends. I'm Scott Philbrook, and this is Tom Maxwell from his essay For the Scrutiny of Science and the Light of Revelation, American Bloodfalls.
For millennia, showers of blood have been reported in sources both historical and literary. The earliest record comes from Homer's Iliad, in which Zeus makes it rain blood as a portent of slaughter.
Join us tonight for part 1 of our 2-part series, American Bloodfalls, with our special guest, Tom Maxwell.
And we're back.
That we are, folks. Man, we got a fun show tonight. I am so excited.
I am too, because this is Charles Fort territory we're entering here, and
Yes.
we have a true Fortean researcher, folklorist with our guest tonight. So I'm very excited to talk to him, and we've always wanted to check this out, and that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you think is just about one little event, and it turns out it's been going on for 200 years.
It's much more disgusting than we thought.
Yes,
I don't know
that's
why.
right. It is much more
I don't know
disgusting.
why I thought this wouldn't be this gross. Just had it in my mind, perhaps immaturely, childishly, that it would be steaks falling from the sky, like T-bones.
Right.
Like, ooh,
yeah, that would
cuts
be
of
nice.
meat. Cuts of meat, yeah.
Well, folks, just some quick merch notes. The spooky season is upon us. We finally got trucker hats. A ton of people were asking for them, so we had some cool ones made. They are mesh-back traditional trucker hats by the super excellent hat company, Richardson. They have leather laser-engraved show logo patches on them, and there are 2 styles. It came out pretty great, and they should be in the store in a few days. So visit astonishinglegends.com and check out our shop if you want to pick up one of those new hats. We didn't do a huge batch because we didn't know how they're going to sell, so they might sell out quick, but if they do, we'll get some more. And several of our logo tees were out of stock too, so those are being reprinted, and we still have some leftovers from Monster Fest, those t-shirts, so look for those too.
Yeah.
Oh, and we had taken the beanies down from the store because we took them all to Monster Fest, but they're back in the warehouse, so they're available again now, so just in time for the fall. So be looking at astonishinglegends.com, check out our store for that.
And on top of that, though, we're working on limited colorway hoodies for October, again, as is our tradition. So we're taking feedback from listeners, and this year's design will have large, spooky, special colorway logo. That's industry talk, folks. Colorways.
Yes.
Scott loves
Colorway.
He loves to say that. Yeah. And these spooky special colorways will be on a logo on the back of the hoodie rather than on the front, and then a small logo on the breast for a pullover hoodie. So we're going to start hand silk screening those and then shipping them out. So just keep your ears on housekeeping for the updates.
That's what we call this section, housekeeping. Colorways, housekeeping, it's all industry terminology. Last but not least, we have a few notes about the Astonishing Legends Network, which, by the way, we're working on a website for that, too, for that one guy who complained. That'll be out soon.
Ed and Chris from Scared All the Time just premiered their 3rd season with a freakishly terrifying episode on sudden death. I think that might be, is that Ed's biggest fear? Just suddenly dropping?
I don't know. We'll have to see where it falls on the fear tier. Yeah, not sure.
All that was posted just a few days ago, so find and subscribe to Scared All the Time wherever you get your podcasts.
And for those of you who enjoy the Midnight Library, Miranda will be back with season 11 on October 13th, 2024. So keep an eye out for that. And the final announcement for tonight comes from somebody who was sitting in the studio when we came in today. I don't know how long he's been in there. Rich Hadam. Rich, what are you doing here?
I can't believe I haven't said anything this entire time. This is so unlike me. I was just here to talk about the fact that you guys are going to help me with my AMA in beginning the American Medical Association.
I didn't think that's what it was. No, I think it's Ask Me Anything, Rich. I think it's Ask Me Anything.
Dang. Yeah. I will be doing that. You can ask me anything. The way it's going to work is my listeners for Richard Hadam's Paranormal Bookshelf, they were alerted. In fact, your audience was alerted too. So everyone has sent in a bunch of questions, and then we're going to get together. You guys are going to ask the questions. I'm going to provide the answers.
Well, I have a couple. Here's my first question. How does a show that you overshare on so much already, how can anyone possibly have any questions about you?
I know, that was my feeling too, but these people are very invasive.
Okay.
These fans are very curious. So I threw the door open. They ran through like a pack of angry wildebeest. So these questions are very probing, if you will. The fans of the show, when they get in touch, it's always with a phrase along the lines of, how do you know my childhood?
Wow.
How did you know I went through the same thing with my divorce, whatever it happens to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Clearly I'm telling my story, but I'm telling everyone's story, I guess. It's kind of getting out there. And I think people who are into this stuff, the stuff that we're into, we're into it because we're asking questions about our lives and about reality. And I think that it becomes very personal for people. And I think that's why the show resonates. So anyway, you like getting personal, we're going to get even more personal. And then it's going to drop on us Monday, September 16th.
All right, Rich, show yourself out.
Heading for the door now. I'll just be hiding outside waiting for you guys to finish up. See ya.
All right, so people often ask us how we come up with a topic, and the way we got to this one was definitely outside the norm, and that's very much part of the story. So just quickly, we wanted to share how we decided it was time to finally cover Bloodfalls. We were doing the Third Man Syndrome back in March of this year, and during that episode, we talked a little bit about Italian mountain climber Reinhold Messner, and that came up. He's come up on the show a few times, actually, but he had personally experienced the Third Man Syndrome.
Right, but aside from spotting the Yeti and keeping on that track and the Third Man Syndrome and wanting so badly to have talked to Mr. Reinhold, that wasn't the only thing about all that, right, Scott?
No, because when Reinhold Messner comes up, I have to always mention this album that came out in 1999 by North Carolina musician the Ben Folds Five, called The Unauthorized Biography of Reinhold Messner. Now, the funny thing there being that they claim to have no idea who he really was when they named that album. It was just supposed to be a non sequitur album title or something. I can't remember. But anyway, I always mention that because in my former life as a television commercial and sometimes music video editor, I edited a music video for Ben Folds off his first solo album in 2001. It was for a song called Rockin' the Suburbs, and the video was directed by Weird Al and produced by a dear friend of mine, Beth Lemure. So, of course, I mentioned that, and all of that connects back to North Carolina, so I always have to bring it up. Note, I won't ever do it again. It's just one of those things, and on top of all of this, my wife and I have always been huge Ben Folds fans. Now, to be clear, I don't know Ben. I met him once on the set of the shoot for that video, but that was fleeting. It's safe to say he has no idea who I am. But someone who does know him heard us talking about the Reinhold Messner album, which the Ben Folds Five released in 1999. That guy was Tom Maxwell. Now, you might not immediately know Tom's name, but he is the former lead singer of another world-famous North Carolina band, one of my favorites, the Squirrel Nut Zippers. And on top of that, he wrote and sings the song Hell from their 1996 platinum album, Hot.
In the afterlife, you could be headed for the serious type. Now you make the scene all day, but tomorrow I'll be talking on astonishing legends about rains of blood and, it's a work in progress, you guys. I'm sorry.
That's pretty great, though.
Yeah.
I think I came in flatter on this version than I did on the original, which is really saying something.
No one's the wiser.
Nobody.
Maybe
is the wiser.
your studio engineer, perhaps. But thank you so much. This is such a treat. We rarely get anybody to perform their serious talents on the show because Scott and I have no talents other than presenting other people's talents. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome, and I thank you in return, literally, for allowing me to tick a box on my bucket list. I'm not going to make a big deal of it. This is my favorite podcast, and I love it.
Aww.
And I get to be on it. It's gravy. It's wonderful. So I thank you.
As Scott said, we're huge fans. It's a little bit of a mutual, whatever you call it.
But I will say the Astonishing Legends has a Spotify profile, and we have a thing called Astonishing Al's Mixtape. That's the name of our logo, Al. And it has 142 songs on it, all kind of like creepy oriented. And this was one of the first ones that I put on there. Playlist is curated by one of our listeners, Megan Lagerberg, who's a really talented graphic artist, but she keeps an eye on it and keeps adding cool tracks to it. But that was the first one we put on there. It's a great playlist, by the way. I turn it on, every month. I can't just say October. So, Tom, you sent in an email. You said, hey, this is me. This is who I am. I was like, I can't believe this. I can't believe that we're actually communicating. And we wound up hanging out some this summer. Yeah. And in the course of all of that, it came up that you happen to be somewhat of an expert in Bloodfalls.
I am. The reason that I can say that, I think I wrote you, I said, I'm sort of tongue in cheek. I'm the foremost expert in reported rains of blood and flesh in 19th century America. And I think the reason that I can make that claim is because the subject is so unpleasant that no one wants to have anything to do with it. And so but I do, and I don't know why. Yeah. And I've, for 20 years, I've been that guy at the party.
It's such a Fortean kind of thing. And no doubt he wrote about it and researched it, but he would go to parties. He was known, I guess, and outside of the salon that he held for people that actually had an interest in this. So it would be more like Scott and I entertaining our friends where they're like, we don't care. What are you talking about? A couple of things I want to say off the bat. One, that a paranormal event, often, the reporting is, especially if it's from decades, eras past, it's probably a little suspect, perhaps not real solid. Here you have much more solid reporting, I believe, from the people that witnessed it. So you have that to go off of, lots of historical accounts going much further back than anybody would imagine who's just casually perusing the topic or mildly interested in it. And so, like Charles Fort, you went about the hard work of collecting all the reports you could find about this, cataloging them, and then trying to draw some conclusions. So hats off to that. Secondly, as far as a paranormal event, as we always say, they're not experienced in a vacuum. So when these things happen, as Scott and I said, well, you have a little bit of information about a very strange thing that happened, but how do people deal with it? What do we do with that from here on out? How do we handle this in our own minds? How do we reconcile this? How do we sleep at night when something like this is close or has happened to you or happens to people that you know and respect and you want to believe them? And the other thing about this is that this experience, like many other paranormal experiences, is unpleasant to experience. People think like, oh, that would be so cool. I wish it would rain blood. That would be so fantastic. And then you read the accounts like, no, it was putrid. It was awful. You really have no recourse back then, especially in the 19th century, to clean it up. You just had to wait for the next rain to wash this grotesqueness away, which is basically a field of horribly putrid, rotting flesh smell, not to mention the actual rotting flesh and blood and whatever this stuff is.
And a full kidney in one of them. When I read the phrase full kidney, I was like, what?
Yeah, bits of adipose animal fat. And it's whatever it is that it's not just that, though, because you have to imagine to the people that it happened to, it's not just, look, that was weird. Well, let's get the hose out. It's just like, what is that? What does it mean? Are we going to die? I mean, what's going to happen here? Is God mad at us? And so in looking at this as a phenomenon, as a paranormal happening, it ticks off all the boxes of a great classic Fortean event. Thank goodness we have Tom here to kind of lay it all out. There was a fantastic article, one for Southern Cultures.
Southern Cultures Quarterly. Yeah, that's right. Was back in 2001. That's the one the quote came from at the top of the show. That's a peer-reviewed academic journal published by the University of North Carolina Press. Focuses on history, politics, folklore, literature, and various cultural aspects of the American South. Tom, how in the world did you wind up writing a Bloodfall essay for an academic peer-reviewed journal?
I knew William Ferris, who's a documentarian from Mississippi and who works down in the Love House. I forget the name of that organization that prints Southern Cultures, which is shame on me. And I remember going to his office and saying, I have a tiger by the tail. And then starting to babble about, reported rains of blood and flesh, which I don't think he was expecting. And I also knew the editor of the magazine, and they were like, sure, write about it. And I did, and it was peer reviewed. So I had to have all my ducks in a row with respect to, sources and citations and stuff like that.
Did that make you nervous, having it be peer reviewed? Had you ever written anything that was peer reviewed before?
No, never.
Yeah.
No, it didn't make me nervous because I'm not sure I know what it means.
Okay.
But it sounds like, like one step removed from a doctoral thesis or something. I don't know. Right. It had some kind of stamp on it. And plus, I just felt like I talked to an editor. I was like, I really want to write a book about it. And so I talked to some editor of whatever, Paranormal, a publishing company. And he's like, well, okay, as long as you can get UFOs in it. And I was like, there's no UFOs in this. I don't even know what you're talking about. So,
we'll squeeze some in.
Yeah, we're going to squeeze them in there. Part 2, we're going to have to talk about that.
Yay! Well, okay. Well, then I'll go ahead and start on the book proposal.
Well, tell us about the second article you wrote then.
Oh, for Medium.
Yeah, for terrifically comprehensive for contemporary accounting of the events.
When I first got into this, a friend of mine was writing a book called Strange Carolinas. This is back in 2006. And he said, do you have anything? And I said, yeah, I know about a couple of times that it rained blood and meat in North Carolina. And then a friend of mine is a librarian at Duke University, and he sort of did a quick search, and he sent me a letter that someone had written into a Charleston newspaper in 1859 referring to the slave insurrectionist Nat Turner using the fact of a rain of blood to convince his followers that the judgment of God was about to fall on white people. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
You mean there's a world to this? So then there's that. And then another event that happened in Tennessee in 1841. To answer your question, Forrest, the piece I wrote for Medium was saying, in my mind, these events are related. And so I talk about Nat Turner, which we'll get into later, having witnessed the aftermath of a bloodfall. And then 10 years later, almost to the day, slaves witnessing a fall on a farm in Tennessee, and how revealing that was of a lot of anxieties in the South.
Right.
No one came out and said it, but it's just plain as day.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's cool is when you start examining, high strangeness and weird things, when you watch a sci-fi movie, everybody's costume is the most, like if the sci-fi movie was made in 1974, their costumes are the most 1974. They're the most revealing of that time. And when you study like high strangeness, you learn a lot about the society that was experiencing that stuff. And so when I started, because Bloodfalls, who knows? I wasn't there. Either you dismiss them, you say that didn't happen because it couldn't happen, which I'm not going to do, or you go, I don't know, but look at all this other crazy stuff and the way that people are reacting to it. And I can learn something from that.
It's very much a thematic approach that I believe Stephen King takes a lot, where you have something strange that happens, something horrific, something paranormal, something just weird, and then you look at how it affects other people. And often, Storm of the Century, The Mist, The Stand, a lot of his stories are how people then turn on each other. And you also see it a lot in Twilight Zone themes. You could be an air raid siren, and then like people will have to get to a bomb shelter. Well, this guy down the street, our friend here who we're just having dinner with, he has one, but we don't. Why won't he let us in? And we're going to break the door down. It's just people turning on each other until something is relieved, the pressure let off, and then, hey, can we go back to normal now? Can we just kind of forget all this? And you can and you can't. And throughout the course of American history, sure, since it doesn't really seem to happen a lot anymore, we've kind of forgotten about it. But as some of the contemporary commenters during that time in the mid 1840s, 1830s were saying, is that we shouldn't forget about this because it's bigger than just what happened. It's bigger than the crap that fell from the sky. This affects us all. And how do we look at ourselves? How should we behave between each other as human beings? What does this all mean? And more specifically, it turns the lens back on ourselves, and that are we monsters? Is not the horrific thing the stuff that fell from the sky, but is it us? So, all these bigger themes that happen.
I found that when I would read these newspaper accounts, when they would even be printed, the people who were doing the reporting, who took the time to write to the newspaper or give their real name or recount the events that they experienced, were constantly saying, please explain this. Please, someone give us an explanation of how this could have happened. And it happens over 100 years. The earliest one I found is from March of 1708. The most recent one I found is from 1902.
Yeah, it's 194 years.
Yeah.
It's 2 centuries.
What would happen almost without exception is that if the scientific community, which was becoming more sort of better at their job, but if they would even consider looking at this phenomenon, they usually just issued, and this is very Charles Fort, they would just issue an explanation to make it go away. I mean, whatever sort of seemed to satisfy the particulars of that given event, they would say, oh, it's that. And they would want to clear the stage for the next act. But the next act would be a repeat performance.
Right.
And then 5 years later, 10 years later, people are like, please account to us if you can the reasons why. And then in one of the North Carolina events in the 1880s was investigated by a chemistry professor who ended up being president of UNC at Chapel Hill. And he said, I'm putting this on record because maybe if enough of these are put on record, we can learn what it's about. That dude had been happening for 150 years already. You just don't know because no one wants to talk about it. So,
in a minute, I want to start sharing with our listeners some of these events so we can get a little more granular on it.
Into the meat of it.
Yeah, which you did. I mean, I've never had so much research dumped in my lap
You're welcome.
for a potential topic, which, and actually a very hearty thank you, because that takes a load off of us. I mean, you've really done a lot of digging here.
This is not canon, right? There's so much here, and it elides easy explanation. In my mind, I don't think there's ever been a satisfactory explanation, maybe one that allows people to wander away and be, vexed by something else. And yet it's just not part of our cultural history, even for people like we are with interests like we have, probably because it's so unpleasant. But I'll tell you this as a bit of a teaser. Since I've revisited it, knowing that I was going to be on this program, it occurs to me that, of course it was frightening and people were frightened by it. And a lot of people were very frightened by these events. I don't actually see it that way when I think about it. I actually think about it in positive terms, humanistic terms, which we'll get into later, I hope.
If you've ever had a health problem or even just got a checkup and then needed additional tests or procedures, you know the routine. First, you see your primary care physician, nurse, or medical assistant, and then you get sent to a bunch of specialists. You feel like you're getting bounced around, just going from facility to facility, trying to keep up all the appointments, and you get a ton of often hard-to-understand medical jargon thrown at you. This is especially the case with senior health care, so it's super important that you start off with a doctor and primary care that really clicks with you. Someone that gets you and that you feel totally comfortable with and confident in.
That is so true, man. Good healthcare is a journey, so it's super important you start that journey off on the right foot, and you do not want to compromise any step during it. And that's where Zocdoc can be a really important tool to help point you in the right direction to begin with. Zocdoc is the place where you can find and book doctors who will make you feel comfortable, listen to you, and prioritize your health. You want as many options available to you as possible.
Yeah, and you can search by location, availability, and insurance, so literally no compromises here, because with Zocdoc, you've got more options than you know.
Zocdoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare highly rated in-network doctors near you and instantly book appointments with them online.
Once you find the doc you want, you can book them immediately. No more waiting awkwardly on hold with a receptionist.
And these docs all have verified reviews from actual real patients.
We're talking about booking appointments with tens of thousands of top-rated, patient-reviewed, credible doctors and specialists.
You can filter specifically for ones who take your insurance, are located near you, and treat basically any condition you're searching for.
The typical wait time to see a doctor booked on Zocdoc is between just 24 to 72 hours. That's it. And you can even score same-day appointments.
You know us. We're all about research, and we've used Zocdoc to research the best healthcare professionals available to us, and you should too.
Go to Zocdoc.com/legends and download the Zocdoc app for free. Then find and book a top-rated doctor today.
That's ZocDoc.com/legends.
Zocdoc.com/legends.
This episode is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform that empowers you to create your online presence or launch your own passion project.
That's right. Squarespace makes it easy for anyone to build a stunning, professional-looking website, whether you're starting your own podcast or any other business, growing a brand, or just looking to share your creativity with the world.
Their new guided design system, Squarespace Blueprint AI, is a game changer. You can start a completely personalized website from scratch, choosing from professionally curated layout and styling options to craft a unique online presence tailored to your specific needs.
And it's not just about the look. Squarespace also has powerful integrated SEO tools to help you get discovered faster. Their optimized SEO features ensure your website shows up more often to the right people, so you can grow your online footprint the way you want.
Squarespace's flexible payment tools make it a breeze for your customers to check out and complete their purchases. You can accept all the major payment methods like credit cards, PayPal, and Apple Pay. And in eligible countries, you can even offer buy now, pay later options with Afterpay and ClearPay.
But, like we said a minute ago, Squarespace isn't just for online stores and businesses. It's perfect for personal websites too. Whether you want to create an online scrapbook to share your family's memories, a portfolio to showcase your creative work, or even an educational platform to sell your expertise as online courses, Squarespace has you covered.
Their next-generation website editor, Fluid Engine, is where the real magic happens. With Fluid Engine, it's never been easier for anyone to unlock their creativity online. You can customize every design detail with Squarespace reimagined drag-and-drop technology for both desktop and mobile. Astonishing Legends is 10 years old this month, if you can believe that, and we can tell you, back when we went to build our first website in 2014, not on Squarespace, well, it's like back then we were driving a Model T, and now we have a Ferrari.
It kind of is. Yeah, it was a little rough back then, but it really has come a long way, and the best part is Fluid Engine is included in any new Squarespace site, so you can stretch your imagination, play with different layouts and styling options, and create a truly unique online presence that reflects your brand, your personality, or your passion.
Squarespace also has powerful tools for content creators. You can upload and organize your video library, sell access to exclusive content behind a paywall, and even use their AI-powered writing assistant to generate personalized copy for your website, product descriptions, and more.
It's all about empowering you so you can bring your ideas to life online. No matter what kind of website you want to build, an online store, a professional portfolio, a personal blog, or anything in between, Squarespace has the features and flexibility to make it happen.
So what are you waiting for? Head to squarespace.com right now and start your free trial. And when you're ready to launch your new website, be sure to go to squarespace.com/legends to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code LEGENDS.
That's squarespace.com/legends and the offer code LEGENDS. Get started with Squarespace today and unlock your online potential.
Rest assured, you're still listening to Astonishing Legends with Scott Philbrook and Forrest Burgess. And now, back to the show.
On that note, you had shared with us a lot of research that you had, literally hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents, newspaper articles, research, all very well organized, I might add, by date and location. And since we were talking about doing this, you went and organized 34 pretty significant events, which we think are all really fascinating. So what we were thinking of doing, Tom, if this sounds okay to you, is talking about some of these now for part one. Let's go through and talk about the significance of some of them. Some of them are bigger, more detailed occurrences than others. Mm-hmm. And then, in part two, we'll do some more of that and get onto maybe theories about, why this is all UFOs and no one will accept it.
That sounds great. Well, I'm anxious to get to the no one will accept it part.
Right. Well, first of all, let's get this out of the way, though. You think this really happened? These events really happened from all the research. Can you say that maybe not all of them?
I think that people believed it happened. And I allow that it could have happened. I'm not a meteorologist or anything else.
Right.
But I allow that it could have happened because I have learned that even sort of rhetorically and the way people were thinking and using language, that they were mentally prepared for these events to happen. And we, in this day and age, are not.
Okay.
I allow the possibility that they did happen, even the probability, if for no other reason, based on the internal consistency of the reports themselves, stretching over 150 years by people of all walks of life.
That's a fascinating angle too. And so to be clear, to explain this for my limited comprehension, what you're saying is that if it happened today, we are less prepared mentally, maybe spiritually, metaphysically, most of us, for this to exist, in that our world, as much as we think we're much more sophisticated than people in the 19th and previous centuries, it's like, oh, well, we know everything and we got a handle on this. Our scientists will figure this out. If it happens today, we're not as receiving of it as people in past eras and generations because their thinking was more open to the magical or the supernatural?
It was almost like Homeric idiom.
Mm-hmm.
We're not versed in Homeric idiom. And so, rains of blood don't appear in the Christian Bible or the Septuagint. They do appear in Homer, in the Iliad.
Right.
And in ancient history and medieval history, and they were reported on. We don't really learn classics, and so we literally don't even have that language. At this time, as we will see, you had people not only claiming that it rained blood, you had people using showers of blood as metaphor. And in that sense, they were mentally prepared for it. And I think that we have, more than we understand, an extraordinary influence over our physical reality based on our intention. And of course, now we're getting into, things like ceremonial magic and stuff, or, 3D reality being thought forms, but let's just go ahead and go there. And so what I'm suggesting is that I don't think these things would happen because we're not prepared for them to happen, because they don't have a role for us. Whereas back then, no matter how alarming or upsetting or frightening these events may have been, there was a role for them. And I think a great metaphoric role that's related to how we use language, which of course I'm a writer, so I guess that's the way my brain would go. But when my brain went there was a ton of stuff that revealed itself to me.
Right.
So there's the brick and mortar. Yeah, there's rotting meat in the tobacco field, and I've collected a sample. There's a ton of that. Just materialistic, evidentiary stuff being looked at under microscopes and being put in Bunsen burners. And then there's the meaning of the word blood and its linguistic root that we can get into.
Right. Maybe it's like we receive the message that we're ready for, because then it has the most impact, other than falling on deaf ears or unlooked at tobacco leaves.
Yeah, it's almost like the things that happen, the paranormal, the high strangeness events that happen in any given time in human history are of that time, are of that culture, are peculiar or particular to that time and place.
Right.
If that makes any sense. So we've got ours and they had theirs. And there is and I couldn't begin to tell you why rains of blood stopped in America, especially since all of the scientific explanations for this damned data were prosaic. And if they were prosaic, you would think this stuff would still be happening. Right. These events would still be happening if it's vomiting buzzards or butterflies emerging from the chrysalis state.
Yeah. And that comes back to something that we've talked about on very early in our show when we covered in episodes 3 and 4, I think it was, the need for cognitive closure at the end of the event. And it's truly unexplainable. And you're trying to figure it out. Rational people are trying to figure out what happened. And they either personally witnessed it or they 100% believe the people that are telling them that it happened. And they can't walk away from it without writing it off as X, Y, or Z. So they come up with X, Y, or Z, be it spiritual, scientific, or whatever thing.
Well, it takes over your life. It's like maybe it's like every story that we cover in some way, because again, what difference does it make if this happens and no one is there to see it? Perhaps bloodfalls are happening, and because we're not, as you say, prepared to handle it, or there's no context for us to derive meaning that they're happening, but really they're not happening in places where either people are, in that it doesn't do us any good. It's that tree falling in the forest and no one's there to hear it, but no one, if they heard it, they don't. What do you do with that? So I heard a tree, big deal. I want to hear a Bigfoot.
So.
In this case, so maybe it's happening, but there's no context that we can gain any meaning from it, and so it doesn't have any purpose. But in this case, that we may have something falling from the sky, when it does happen nowadays, we're flooded with so much more stimulus that it just gets forgotten about or it's passed off. But I think when you're talking about how people react to this, well, case in point to Scott's comment there, like with Dan Povenmire, when he experienced a time slip, that shouldn't have happened. He's a very smart, rational guy. You spend the rest of your life thinking about it. It's like when I asked him years later after college, do you remember that? It's like, I thought about it every day since then. And so when you can't put it...
This is, by the way, this is the co-creator of Phineas and Ferb.
Right. So when you can't file it, or at least give some kind of cognitive closure to what Scott's talking about, it's that thorn the burr under your seat. that will never go away. Or the other thing is to just kind of forget about it. It's like, that was weird. Let's move on.
It depends on how permeable your worldview is, or your structure of reality, what your concept of reality is, and what it can admit, or what is unacceptable in terms of that's an affront to your very sense of what is real. And each of us, I suppose, has a different sort of meter for that in terms of what they can accept emotionally or mentally.
Let's take a look at some of these cases. I'm very much interested in what you know about the individual ones, and I want to look for the common ground. Some of the things that we talked about offline yesterday when we were sort of pre-gaming this a little, I'm starting to notice patterns that I want to ask you about with regard to the names of cities and things like not just Lebanon, which is going to come up. But let's talk about this first one. March 1708, Mobile, Alabama. It's not a ton of information around this one, right?
Yeah, this is one of many that just have a few lines from one newspaper article, and I felt lucky to get it, especially going back this far. This is a weekly, the Boston Newsletter from May 1708, and they say that by letters from Dorchester in South Carolina of April 7th last, we are acquainted that some of their Indian traders met with some Indians who informed them that they were being hunting about 600 or 700 miles from Dorchester towards the French settlement at Mobile, which I assume is present-day Mobile, Alabama. And there fell a shower of blood in which they walked up to the ankles, which I agree is newsworthy. You should put that in the paper. That's a lot of blood.
Yeah, that needs to be in the... Yeah, that's a lot of blood.
That's it, though. That is literally it. And then they just went on and talked about something else.
Right.
But duly noted, right? A shower of blood.
Yeah.
The next one is functionally the same. It happened on June 19th, 1734 in Cork, Pennsylvania. It was printed by the Pennsylvania Gazette-Sun on October 3rd, 1734, and it just says, by a letter from Cork, dated Friday, June 20th, we are informed that a great shower of blood fell on Thursday near that city.
Right.
Nothing about reactions or extent or any of that stuff, but this is clearly something where I feel like they can say, a shower of blood, there was a shower of blood, and their readers would understand what is meant by that, or you know what I mean? I don't know how you guys felt about these events.
These two are so brief. It's like, well, it's up to the ankles. They walked up to the ankles, which I did wonder with the Indians who were reporting this, was that in a bed of water or just literally on land? There was ankle deep blood pooling on the land.
I don't know.
Which is...
My impression is that it's ankle deep on the land, but gee whiz, right? I mean, that's horrific.
That's a lot. That's more than a sprinkling, which you hear about usually in most of these reports, is that there's a splattering, which is enough. That's enough.
Right.
This is you're talking about buckets and the shining amounts.
Apocalypse
I think
coming out of an elevator. Yeah.
The thing to remember is reports of rains of blood go back to the earliest recorded history, just about, with people like Pliny, Plutarch, historians who accepted it as true, Cicero, who wasn't quite sure, and then up through medieval Europe, I think China as well. And it was usually like, hey, it rained blood. It means that the king is that bad things are going to happen because it rained blood. Or the king was assassinated. That's because it rained blood, or whatever. But people accepted it.
One of the plagues, one of the plagues on Pharaoh, the rivers turning to blood, the visceral horror of it all, and that when you go back to and everything's in blood. Well, what happens with blood? It attracts flies and other diseases and other animals you don't want around, and it's just generally very nasty and shocking. There was a question posed to one of my English classes about just the color red and why is it so important to people? Why do we notice it? And my answer off the bat was, well, it's the color of blood. And so you're talking about the first humans. It's like, what's really redder than blood? In that, yes, you have some flowers like that. The sunset's red. Fire is a red-orange, and that's kind of dangerous. But when you see a gush of blood, that gets people's attention because either you are spilling it or it's yours being spilt, and that's a serious thing, and there's really nothing quite that color that has never changed. That's primordial. And so what do you want to do to get people's attention? You rain blood.
For sure.
Because blood tells you something's wrong. Pay attention to this. This is a message. Or even if it's just a natural weather phenomenon, whirlwinds, something's going on. Be careful. And so when you say you go back to the Iliad, all of this is used in such great metaphor. And you could say, well, Homer used it because, again, that's a big dramatic thing.
Absolutely.
And a narrative.
But it also had meaning, propitiatory rites or funeral rites or grieving. And that's what he did. Zeus made it rain blood because of the death of Sarpedon, and he was grieving the death of that mortal. What I find super interesting, and this just popped into my head, you've got this sort of Western civilization history of rains of blood. Okay, cool. It goes back to the Romans and the Greeks and up through medieval Europe, blah, blah, blah. Okay, cool. But who's telling them about this in the very first known American report? It's Native Americans.
Right.
Do they have some oral history of rains of blood? Because the people who are writing this in Dorchester and South Carolina, they're functionally Englishmen. And so they would know rain of blood, but it's so interesting to me that the story that they got was not from colonials.
Well, so let's talk about this one 70 years later in Warren County, Ohio. This is one of the ones that there's a lot more information on.
This is really interesting to me because the early reports, if anyone says anything in terms of, why the event happened, you start the century with sort of, I don't want to use the word superstitious, but more of a religious bent. And this is a perfect example. At the time, there was a religious group called the Schismatics. They were separating, I believe, from the Presbyterian Church. They were called the Jerks because they would be moved by the Spirit. They would fall down like they were dead, or they'd leap around, they'd scream. Somebody wrote they engaged in exercises which were believed to have been of an involuntary kind. And so they were called the Jerks. Today we call them Shakers, so they're still around.
Yes.
But they were in the middle of separating from the Presbyterian Church, and they had a meeting house at Turtle Creek called Turtle Creek Meeting House in Warren County, Ohio. And so they were looking for some sort of imprimatur, like, hey, it's okay, you guys want to create your own church. And so they put a lot by the book of Joel, which is a prophetic text in the Jewish Bible. It's also obviously included in the Old Testament. And they had specific verses that they felt were fulfilled, right, from Joel, which was Joel 2:28-31. And in that it says, and ye shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I am the Lord your God, and none else, and my people shall never be ashamed. And it shall come to pass afterward that I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh. That's a very important line, I think. And your sons and daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, your young men shall see visions, and I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. And they saw all kinds of crazy stuff in the sky and loud reports and hissing sounds, but the thing that really sold it for them was a shower of blood that fell in the summer of 1804, 7 miles from the Turtle Creek Meeting House. If I'm not mistaken, Scott, is that also nearby a town called Lebanon? I could be wrong.
The middle of Turtle Creek, I was just looking at that now, is 3.25 miles from Lebanon, Ohio, which I already know that probably they don't pronounce it
right
the way that it looks. So everyone save the emails. I'm sure it's Lebanon or Lebanon. It's different in every state. But yes, it is spelled, it is the same. It is Lebanon, Ohio. And yeah, that's just 3.25 miles from Turtle Creek. So we don't know which direction this bloodfall was, do we, from Turtle Creek?
We don't know what direction. We do know that the bloodfall happened 7 miles from the Turtle Creek Meeting House, but they don't say where. What's interesting is that this is just handed down in church lore. It's received uncritically. They saw a rain of blood. That was good.
Right.
That meant that literally it was a sign from God that they were doing the right thing. The end. Okay. To my knowledge, of course, one never knows, no associated newspaper articles or anything else. But it worked for them, and moving on to probably the most startling, consequential event related to a rain of blood, which took place sometime in the spring or summer of 1831 in Southampton County, Virginia, in a township called Cross Keys. And it was very obviously the aftermath of a rain of blood that was witnessed by a young slave who was maybe 30, 35 years old, who was a preacher and also considered a prophet and a very religious person, who had already seen signs and wonder in the sky and was asking for confirmation and saw, he said, I wondered greatly at these miracles and prayed to be informed of a certainty of the meaning thereof. And shortly afterwards, while laboring in the field, I discovered drops of blood on the corn as though it were dew from heaven. And now the Holy Ghost had revealed itself to me and made plain the miracles it had shown me. For as the blood of Christ had been shed on this earth and had ascended to heaven for the salvation of sinners and was now returning to earth again in the form of dew, it was plain to me that the Savior was about to lay down the yoke he had borne for the sins of men, and the great day of judgment was at hand. And the person who witnessed that and came to that conclusion was Nat Turner, who then in the summer of 1831, along with other enslaved people, led an insurrection that slaughtered indiscriminately 55 white people in Southampton County.
That was roughly 6 years later, but at this point, he was already considered a prophet,
Yes.
right?
He was considered a prophet in his neighborhood, I believe, by both white and black neighbors.
Okay.
And he definitely, had a Bible, and he said something like this. We got this from a book called The Confessions, his Confessions. He said, my grandmother, who was very religious and to whom I was much attached, my master, who belonged to the church, and other religious persons who visited the house and whom I often saw at prayers, noticing the singularity of my manners, I suppose, and my uncommon intelligence for a child, remarked that I had too much sense to be raised, and if I was, I would never be of service to anyone as a slave. Now, what's amazing to me about this is that the white people fight back. The lawyer that ended up taking Nat Turner's so-called confession, Thomas R. Gray, was part of an armed militia that met the insurrectionists in a field and tried to fight them off. And a lot of them are captured. Nat Turner is not. Nat Turner hides under some fence posts and in a cave or something like that. So while they're looking for Nat Turner, and obviously well before his confessions have even been taken, much less published, William Lloyd Garrison, a staunch abolitionist from up north who writes for a paper called The Liberator, wrote basically saying, see, we told you so. We told you that this is what you're going to get for human trafficking. And he wrote, what we have so long predicted at the peril of being stigmatized as an alarmist and declaimer has commenced its fulfillment. The first drops of blood, which are but a prelude to a deluge from the gathering clouds, have fallen. And so he talks about a rain of blood as metaphor for a violent insurrection. And that blew my mind.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And then, and Turner also, he hid for like six weeks in that cave, I guess. Yeah. Which there were some pictures in your Medium article that were amazing.
Those amazed me too. That someone took a picture of the field where they fought with the white militia and of the cave, which looks awful, hole in the ground. The swamp where the slaves met to plan and had a barbecue to plan the insurrection. And then the next thing was the piece that my librarian friend Duke found for me. Years and years later, a letter written to the Charleston Mercury by someone who called themselves Vigilance. And basically this guy is like, I'm a white guy and we're scared of everything and we should teach our Confederate daughters how to shoot. But then he wrote this. This was in November of 1859. History teaches us that the most effectual mode to rouse an ignorant people is to appeal to their superstition and to their lust. Nat Turner made his followers in Virginia believe that the vengeance of God was about to fall upon the white men because it had about that time rained blood and it was a powerful instrument in his hand. So the guy doesn't question that it rained blood. Right. He just says Nat Turner interpreted it as the vengeance of God. And then Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, also wrote a book called Men of Our Times in 1868. And she talked about Turner and she said, years passed and the prophetic visions of Nat Turner were fulfilled on the soil of Virginia. It did indeed rain blood. The very leaves of the trees dripped blood, but the work was done, the yoke was broken, and the oppressed went free. And of course, she's talking metaphorically about the Civil War. Again, extraordinary to me. And then the last thing I found was, again, many, many, many years later in 1876. So the Turner insurrection was 1831. In 1876, the Alexandria Gazette is talking about the Kentucky meat shower that had just happened. And they said, oh, this is not a new wrinkle. In this county many years ago, at the time of Nat's insurrection, there was a shower of blood, drops of which remained on the clover blossoms for several days. And at the time, scientists suggested that the wind had rifled some slaughterhouse, and the superstitious that it denoted bloodshed, war, etc. And every time you see like, oh, these superstitious people are scared of the end of the world, or there's going to be a big conflagration, they're exactly right. They were right. There was bloodshed and conflagration. It did rain blood.
And I think it's important to keep in mind historically for those who may not have studied this in school, especially people overseas or for our listeners, people at the time, in retribution for the horrors of slavery for generations, were really shook up by what Nat Turner and his followers did because of the level of what they thought was justifiable brutality. And that, if people don't know, we're talking about Villisca axe murder level of a family, a plantation master being hacked to death. And also nobody waking up. That was another odd thing. Is that again, this did remind me, this anecdote about the house, as Nat Turner described it, what they did is that it is, nobody woke up. It was Villisca axe murder. And to people's horror, especially when you think like, well, hey, slavery is justified. It's in the Bible. It's okay. And we need to make a buck here off these poor folks. In one description by Nat Turner himself is that they had forgotten an infant that was in a crib and realized later that we forgot somebody. Two of the guys went back and murdered the infant.
Yeah, it's awful.
And so it's awful. And when the white folks found out about it, of course, they were shook to the core, like, oh my gosh, is this going to happen everywhere? It's their worst nightmare for the horrible things that they did. And on the other hand, Nat Turner and his followers think like, no, this is what you get. This is coming to you. And this is the vengeance of the Lord as preordained by the blood falling. And so not only is blood falling from the sky, landing in your fields horrible, and anybody that came near it was sickened by the smell and the sight of it. In that, again, what a great metaphor, or just a sign, literally from the heavens, that bad times are coming. There's a time of vengeance, and you get your comeuppance. That's what's happening. And so it's a horrible realization for not only, I think, the white folks of like, oh, you know what, they can rebel and it's going to be awful, but also for the people looking for their freedom, and that this didn't succeed. There wasn't a groundswell, and then it led to emancipation, and that this got horribly put down as well. And now you're set back again.
Not only did it not succeed, it got a lot worse. And so it almost goes without saying that the white ownership class killed exponentially more enslaved people than the enslaved people killed of the white people, and then kept this sword of Damocles hanging over their head for another generation of just living in terror of what you believe is almost an inevitability for the thing that you're doing that on some level is wrong. And then to have something like the Turner insurrection, and there were other insurrections as well. I don't know that they were that sort of profligate in their slaughter, but that had a huge effect on the slaveholding states and continued to.
Yeah.
They may have been scared of it before, but then it's real. It's like, oh, now it's walked through the door. We know it's real.
Exactly.
Hey, are you the kind of guy that likes to jump through hoops to get a great deal?
No. But speaking of jumping through hoops, we did just go to the fair.
Oh, were there people jumping through hoops there?
Well, no, but there were hoops you could toss onto pop bottles to win prizes.
So that's kind of the opposite of jumping through hoops. You're putting the hoops out.
Yeah, okay, never mind. That's not the point, all right?
Okay.
The point is, I brought canned goods so we could get $5 off the admission tickets, and it was for a good cause, and that's about the extent of my hoop jumping for a discount. Also, the cans were a bunch of vegetables I didn't want anymore.
Okay, I see how it is with the vegetables. Well, you know how you can get a much bigger discount on something everyone needs, and you don't need to bring cans of lima beans?
Oh, I think we both do. And all you need to do to get a great deal is to go online to Mint Mobile. It is so easy. No hoops, no BS, just great wireless service at a very reasonable price. It turns out Mint Mobile offers premium wireless service for just $15 a month. Zero baloney or lima beans, although I do like lima beans on occasion. What I do like better, though, is when a company says they're going to give you a great deal on their product and you actually end up getting it.
Mint certainly does that. And in fact, probably the most hoops you'll have to jump through is getting out of the death grip of your old wireless service. The Mint Mobile part is a breeze. Their website is straightforward and they make it super clear about the plans and pricing that suit your needs. And then the final activation also couldn't be easier.
To get started, go to mintmobile.com/AL. There, you'll see that right now, all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan.
All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts.
Find out how easy it is to switch to Mint Mobile and get 3 months of premium wireless service for just $15 a month.
To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/AL.
That's mintmobile.com/AL.
Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/AL.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customers on first 3-month plan only.
Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply.
See Mint Mobile for details.
Hey man, have you heard of Two Girls, One Ghost?
Oh, heck yeah, they're famous.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes, I know. It's the famous podcast.
Okay, well, did you know that the Two Girls, One Ghost podcast might be haunted?
Well, it certainly seems that way. In fact, as they say, Two Girls, One Ghost may be the most haunted podcast in America. Hosts Corinne and Sabrina didn't want to believe it at first, but 7 years later and hundreds of encounters submitted by listeners later, they can no longer ignore it.
No, they cannot. Yeah, folks, we're talking ghosts, EVPs in episodes, spirits making contact with listeners, orbs darting through their YouTube videos, and so much more. It makes me kind of glad we've only had our lights flicker that one time.
Zoinks, we don't need to be freaked out any more than we already are. It's hard enough just getting our own show produced as it is. Well, paranormal enthusiasts Sabrina and Corinne explore the deepest, darkest, spookiest places in the world, delivering doses of research, history, and spine-tingling tales.
If possessed kids crawling backwards up walls, campers entranced in fairy orgies, and creatures chasing drivers down back roads is your thing, tune in to Two Girls, One Ghost wherever you listen to podcasts.
Yikes. Well, new episodes are released every Thursday and Sunday.
And now you can join Sabrina and Corinne every Tuesday on Patreon and share your own haunting tale live on their campfire stories.
Join the Summerween trend and satisfy your spooky itch with Two Girls, One Ghost. But be warned, side effects might include a haunting or two, so listen at your own risk. But be sure to listen.
This is Trish. Thank you for listening to Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
Let's briefly touch on the descriptions of what exactly fell when people think, well, it was just blood or something like blood or that was mistaken for blood. Those are certainly some of the explanations, but what exactly was examined in the fields? Blood, which is putrefied, I think. The general smell is just of rotting flesh and death, which, again, that's very demonic. It's very paranormal in that when people go into a haunted place, when they smell that and sulfur and burning excrement, that gets your attention that something not good is here and something not good is going to happen. Get out of here.
Blood, flesh, meat, muscle, fat, liver, brains, skin, a whole kidney, which I alluded to earlier, and then lungs.
Now, Nat Turner did not see this. And I also should point out that what I've been noticing lately, going really deep into this material, is that when people report these events, the blood that's falling is fresh.
And hair too, by the way. Let's not forget the hair.
And that's another thing we'll get into, is the very sort of specific parts of animals and the size of the pieces of meat that fall. But that doesn't happen until 10 years after the Nat Turner event. What Nat Turner saw, it was blood as far as he was concerned, and he would know. And it also took the shape on the leaves of different hieroglyphic characters and numbers that he had already seen in the sky. So it was a confirmation to him that he was being given signs from God, and the blood on the leaves of corn took those shapes. I would love to know what they were.
It also says, and I looked, this is Nat Turner, and I looked and saw the forms of men in different attitudes, and there were lights in the sky. Some people would think that might mean UFOs. Just saying.
It does. We're not going to say it's UFOs, but it's UFOs.
Do I have to do my hair like that guy? Because I haven't been able to do that for 30 years. The schismatics also saw lights in the sky. They saw things zooming around, and they heard loud reports. And Nat saw, what did he say, lights in the sky as if the Savior's hands were stretched from east to west or something.
And there were lights in the sky to which the children of darkness gave other names than what they really were. For they were the lights of the Savior's hand stretched forth from east to west, even as they were extended on the cross on Calvary for the redemption of sinners.
Can I get even deeper on this?
Well, I don't know why you wouldn't.
Thank God. We have this thing called the Confessions, right? Taken by a white man. This document was published. The white man made money off of it, and he was not Turner's lawyer. Someone else was Turner's lawyer. People confuse him as being Turner's lawyer, but he did enter it as evidence against Turner in the trial. So you go, the Confessions of Nat Turner, why does that have any value in terms of being the voice of this individual? Because as we know, slaves didn't even have names, much less voices. In a lot of these accounts, like the next one we're going to talk about, when you read census records, they don't have names. They don't even give them names. They're so dehumanized. And I found an article or an essay by Christopher Tomlins called The Confessions of Nat Turner, a Paratextual Analysis. And in it, he's saying there's a reason to believe that some of the confessions is in Turner's authentic voice. And this is what he wrote, Christopher Tomlins. He wrote, the two parts of the confession narrative, either side of the bridging paragraph, are quite distinct in textual appearance, in punctuation, grammar, and syntax. The forms of pages 7 to 11, which contain the account of the bloody do and all the stuff that Scott just read, is discontinuous, staccato, and non-linear. The untidy syntax and ungrammatical composition suggest haste in writing from notes taken verbatim as the narrator spoke, with explicitly recorded clarifications like the interrogatories or the interjection, the footnote. At one point, Gray says, "Do you think you were wrong?" And Turner says, "Was not Christ crucified?" In other words, we're talking about the notes taken during an actual interview with the living Nathaniel Turner. And I think that's fascinating. And that goes right to the parts where he's talking about finding the blood on the leaves of corn.
And those confessions also, I mean, like you said, he would have profited from them, but this would have been between the time that Turner was captured and before he was executed, right? For the crimes.
That's correct.
All right, so let's talk about this next one, August 1841.
In August of 1841, it starts in terms of the record with a young doctor named W.S. Sale, who lives in Lebanon, Tennessee.
Lebanon.
And he's talking about a young man appearing at his office, carrying a tobacco leaf with a drop of blood on it and saying, "Will you please take a look at this?" Because it fell from the sky. And he's like, "Oh, okay." And he goes down and talks to a witness. And this is an event that happened on the farm of a certain Achilles M. Chandler, who lived on Spring Creek, which is about 5 miles from Lebanon, where in a very out-of-the-way tobacco field at about 1 or 2 in the afternoon, the slaves were working and a small red cloud appeared. And I don't think there were any other clouds in the sky. And it scudded over them and rained blood and pieces of meat and fat over about 2 football field sizes. And this got everyone excited. And Dr. Sale got samples and sent them to a local professor named Dr. Troost at the University of Nashville. And he writes the paper and he's like, "I don't know if I should even be talking about this because I will expose myself, whatever, to the incredulity of the public." But they're saying this happened. The doctor goes to the house. He talks to people who have seen it. He sees, 50 hours later, he goes to the field and he says, I'll read you part of what he wrote. My visit was not until Sunday evening, about 50 hours from the time the matter fell. At that time, there was no odor perceptible, except when the particles were brought very near. The smell was then very offensive. I examined the drops on the tobacco leaves and satisfied myself that they had fallen perpendicularly on the leaves. I next examined for the extent of the shower and ascertained it to have been from 40 to 60 yards in width and 600 or 800 yards in length. A forest on the east and a field of weeds on the west prevented our tracing it beyond the green tobacco. There was probably a drop of blood for every 10 to 15 feet, and he's picking up pieces of what appear to be pieces of an animal.
Muscular fiber,
Yeah.
oily exudation exuding from caused by the heat of the sun.
Right. Which sounds, and some of it sounds like plasma. Like it's real
Yes.
blood. It's not some other kind of materials that they're mistaking for flesh and blood. This is really, these people certainly know what rendered animal looks like, rendered animal
Exactly,
flesh. And
yeah.
in this case, okay, so what we're picturing here is a long strip of dispersal. And so what I was thinking, because again, this is all fascinating to me, but I want to know, how does this happen? What is this? Those are like,
No kidding.
Still, we'll get to part 2. But
Yeah.
like, what is going on here? Like these folks. But so if that statement by the field workers is accurate and that it's a small red cloud or some kind of miasma or mist hanging in the sky on a cloudless day, a cloudless sky, and suddenly this starts to fall, it seems like as this cloud passed from east to west, I'm not sure if there's any symbolic value that can be brought from that movement, but basically it seems like it's dropping this as it goes across the sky, therefore creating something of 40 to 60 yards wide and several hundred yards long, and then it's done. And does this then kind of argue against the theory of some kind of whirlwind activity swooping this up from a slaughterhouse or some kind of cows, or basically like roadkill, where it got decimated or ground up somehow and swept up into the sky, and then it just falls later? There doesn't seem to be any other kind of weather going on. And so, again, if this is accurate, this description, then this is something else besides, to me, the common thing that just people have described crop circles as forming, like, well, it's a weather pattern where you get this groundswell of swirling winds and kind of a tornado or whirlwind effect. And that's what's causing the patterns. And it's also lifting frogs and tadpoles into the sky where they mature and then drop to earth as fully formed frogs, which also never made sense to me. Yeah. So I think what's described here is something else going on that is extra natural, supernatural.
Well, here's the thing I want to draw your attention to, which is the description of the event itself, which, alas, we don't get from the enslaved people.
Right.
We get from their owner. But it's telling. So Mr. Chandler stated that his Negroes were at work in the tobacco field, and about 11:30 or 12 o'clock, a rattling noise, like rain or hail, was heard by them, falling around, which they soon found to be drops of blood falling. On looking up, the Negroes state they saw a small red cloud passing swiftly from east to west immediately over their heads, and which, soon after passing over them, disappeared entirely. Now, I saw another description where someone described the event as falling like a thick, hazy shower. Mm-hmm. And this is the first time that we know of a shower of flesh or a rain of flesh in the United States. It won't be the last time that we read of the fall compared to rain, snow, or hail, which has struck me as being something to notice. So that happened, and a whole lot of white people came over and checked it out.
The red cloud is mentioned in the Lebanon, Tennessee, also Clinton, NC, which we haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah, there's another one as well.
And then in 1881 in Virginia, one in 1881.
Yeah, and I don't expect these people to have a working knowledge of rains of blood and flesh from the past 40 or 50 years. I think that they believe they saw a red cloud. There's also one so-called rain of blood that happened in California, which came up in a red cloud.
Right.
And toward the end of the century. So Dr. Sale sends his samples to Dr. Troost, and here's what Dr. Troost wrote. The particles which I received at first were wrapped up in a paper which was enclosed in a letter. This letter had been placed under the cushion of a gig having the greater part of the day the writer on it so that all organic structure was obliterated. It had the offensive smell of putrid animal matter, and the paper in which it was enclosed and the letter were wholly stained with fat. Now, imagine you're Dr. Troost and the mail comes and it's like, dear Professor Troost, here's this
amazing thing.
This is amazing.
Yeah, behold.
Please account to me if you can
Yeah.
this rotting meat that I've sent you in a letter that a writer has sat on.
Under a cushion. I had to look up what a gig was, by the way, which it's a 2-wheeled horse cart, I guess, like they race in the horse races.
It's
buggy. Yeah.
So you can imagine that just bouncing down the road with somebody sitting on top of
right.
it.
And everyone's like, the smell was very offensive. This is the thing that amazed me. The state of Tennessee has a letter written by a dude named Walter B. Morris. He writes his brother about this. And he says, you will doubtless have had by the time this reaches you a notion of the falling of flesh and blood as a shower of rain some 5 miles northeast from Lebanon. Having heard much on the subject, Dr. Edward and myself visited the place on yesterday, and after viewing the ground and getting some specimens, we proceeded to Lebanon where we found Dr. Troost. And then he writes, had it happened in a town, it would have driven the citizens from their houses. So offensive was it. It fell at the extreme backside of a very out-of-the-way field in a tobacco patch. Now, later, in a Raleigh newspaper prints this. We saw this week at Nashville many gentlemen from Wilson County of the highest intelligence and respectability who informed us that the shower was as we have described it. They said that as many as 500 persons were upon the ground last Sabbath examining the clotted blood and putrefied meat that had rained down. The stench was still almost intolerable. So that made me feel better about spending too much time on my phone. People are out going like, hey, I know on Sunday, let's go visit the rotting meat field.
Yeah. Well, again, like Villisca, people had limited entertainment. So when that happened in town, there was a massive turnout.
Yeah. Everyone came and trampled the crime scene.
No, and people, well, there's another tie-in here in that what happened to Nat Turner's body after he was hung was basically just parted out for souvenirs. Same thing with Villisca, in that somebody claimed to have had a piece of
his skull
the
is a relic now,
it,
isn't it? Yeah.
But the father in that story, part of his skull, was kept by somebody in a jar, and it's just, it's on the bar as a souvenir, and people had a different idea. How we think about the past and how people behaved may have some gilding on it, in that they think that, everybody was nice back then and very genteel, and they were in general in many ways, but also a lot more rough. And these things, they live closer to the ground, you could say. And so when they showed up for these, spectacles, people were just as awful as they are today, with the looky-loo aspect and the cynicism and just wanting to see something grotesque as spectacle. It always has been when people showed up in medieval times to an execution and people are drawn and quartered, and it's kind of it's a little bit of sport and morbid curiosity.
Yeah.
And so what you have here is that people showing up for something that's, let's go over here, it stinks. Like, okay, that sounds great.
Yeah. Hey, it rained meat.
Well, and there's another thing about this that I think is interesting too. It smells at the outset, right? Like the minute it shows up.
I don't believe so.
Oh, it doesn't?
I don't think so.
So, because that was a question I had. Is it coming down fresh?
Right.
Like sushi? It's in good shape here for a minute. It's later, after it's been sitting around, it starts to become an issue, or is it immediately putrid?
That's not clear in this. In other accounts, it is clear. It's clearly stated as the one that happened near Clinton, North Carolina in 1850. He says it's fresh.
Yeah.
No one says that here. Dr. Sales says, hey, I showed up 50 hours later in August and it smelled bad. And I'm like, okay. Going back to Turner, it's not nice that, they turned his skin into wallets and stuff, which they did.
Right.
But you said relics. And I write in that piece that the white community received him, dismantled him physically, and received him as a saint. They literally kept relics. They may not have thought that they were doing so. Yeah. They talked about, they displayed his skull. And I said the only church that would venerate those kinds of relics was the Church of Unfettered Capitalism, with the ownership of other human beings as its central tenet. And there's no denying that he was in an obscene and monstrous way venerated in the same way, we have a piece of the true cross or whatever. The whole thing is just an utterly terrible and an awful chapter.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that Turner looms large in the Tennessee event because a North Carolina historian, Guion Griffiths Johnson, wrote about the Tennessee event and said it scared the heck out of North Carolinians. It frightened them terribly. And of course, because why? You had slaves witnessing a quote unquote miraculous event. And the last time that happened, it was bad news. And so the well-meaning doctor sends samples to Professor Troost and says, help, please tell us that this is not from outer space. Literally, that was his job. Tell us that this is from the Earth or if it's from outer space. Meanwhile, everyone else was like, oh, it's a hoax. It's a hoax. It's a hoax perpetrated by the slaves. And in fact, when the Western Journal of Medicine and Surgery wrote that it was a hoax perpetrated by the slaves, everybody in Lebanon came out and said, no, that's wrong. It fell. We know that it rained down. And so they had to actually print a retraction in the next issue of the journal that said, oh, never mind. And meanwhile, Dr. Troost, who was quite a character, he said things that are interesting that I want to talk to you guys about. But he started his letter which was published in the newspaper. He said, the singular phenomenon which took place a few days ago in the vicinity of Lebanon in Wilson County has attracted much attention and has already been noticed in many of our newspapers. As on all similar occasions, this phenomenon has already undergone many alterations and improvements, and before the news of it has crossed the Allegheny Mountains, it will perhaps be said that the town of Lebanon was destroyed by a shower of blood that fell from heaven to punish the inhabitants for their wickedness, who, nevertheless, are not more wicked than the inhabitants of Nashville. So I like this guy.
Yeah.
And he says that he conducted some tests on it. And he said, it is animal flesh, but it's not blood.
Right.
He goes into, I guess, some scientific detail for, 1841. And I'm not a chemist, I mean, not even remotely, but this is what he said. The pieces which were given to me as blood also had a reddish brown color. No distinct structure was visible. This substance had rather the appearance of a piece of dark glue, swells more or less when macerated in water and becomes more opaque, but does not dissolve. Now, these are not the properties of blood. Blood only coagulates when it is taken fresh from the body and not when in a state of putrefaction. And as blood in its natural state has no fat in its composition, these pieces, if they had been blood, could not have stained the paper as mentioned above. And that's all he says. He says it's not blood, and then doesn't tell us what he thinks it is. And I have no idea what it is. And the rest, he's like, yeah, it's an animal.
Yeah, because that's when he's like, there's no doubt this substance is animal matter and belongs to our globe. I love that quote, by the way. Belongs to our globe.
This guy was born in the Netherlands. He serves in the army after France invaded Holland. He's shot in the head. He's shot in the thigh. He's like captured twice by English and French privateers. Then he tries to form a communistic society in Indiana. There's one thing in his bio about how he like played a practical joke on somebody with rattlesnakes, or like he was riding on a carriage and he had a rattlesnake in a basket and it poked its head out and somebody jumped off and he was like, "Don't scare my snake." So he was quite the character,
right?
Anyway, and apparently beloved.
Sounds like an interesting guy.
These articles that appear, people try to convince you, the writers of the the testimonies being upstanding. These are decent people and, pillars of the community and to be trusted. And so what we tell you here is that we don't know exactly what it is, but this did happen in this fashion. And so we're getting an idea of what actually fell from the sky, not in all cases, but here it's not blood. And so there's variations on actually what falls from the sky.
Yes.
There's nothing new that people are experiencing. Animals fall from the sky. So as we said, a rain of frogs, or
fish.
Insects, fish.
Yes.
And people, of course, can think more clearly on a possible explanation for that, which is more prosaic of like, okay, maybe a waterspout did swirl up a school of fry of young fish or minnows or something and transport them over about hundreds of miles and then drop them down. So they start to rain out of nowhere. And that's more believable. But in this case, how did it get macerated in the first place? How did the flesh and the fat and the bits get up into the sky, and where do they come from? Because you could think that, and I don't think cattle mutilation is anything, we've started to discover it more here in the 20th century, and then people will point to like the first case ever was it Lucky the Horse? I can't remember, Skippy. I'm forgetting the name.
Snippy.
Snippy?
Snippy, S-N-I-P-P.
Wow, that's kind of
Snippy.
apropos. But that was one of the first cases where people took notice in the media. He was mutilated in such a way that people knew this was different. Whatever's going on here, and whatever you might want to say, like, well, it's insects doing, not leaving any blood on the ground and taking certain vital organs as if they were surgically removed by a tool that we have no knowledge of today. Well, what's happening, my point being, is that people knew when their animals were gone. So if there's something missing about, you can bet a rancher knows exactly how many head of cattle he has and how many have died, how many are out in the field alive. That's your livelihood. People, unless they're wild animals, these were cattle, these were raised animals, people would certainly know if something went missing or even the remains of something went missing or was manipulated.
Yeah.
But so then you're thinking, okay, then these have to be remains of wild animals. Now, certainly they're out in the wild. We don't know how they were lifted up into the heavens and ground up and then dropped, but that has to be the case then. And so unfortunately, we don't have DNA to tell us back then, like, what kind of animal is this?
Well, it doesn't happen yet, but you start to get explanations. But one thing I want to draw your attention to now, since we're talking about the first rain of flesh, is how Dr. Sale describes the size of the pieces of meat. And they're basically not much bigger than maybe an inch and a half.
Right.
And some of them are fats and some of them are meat, but they're small. Okay. Small portions of flesh, half fat, an inch and a half or 2 inches long. That's it. And we will see a consistency of the kinds of meat being described in these falls. It's not just higgledy-piggledy. It's not just,
Right.
whatever part of the animal comes to hand.
Yeah.
Right.
Troost did offer an explanation where he talked about that there had been a tornado basically in Charlotte recently, and it was really destructive. And he says, well, we all know about whirlwinds. So he conjectured that a whirlwind came into contact with a dead animal and then was carried up. And then he said that the whirlwind, with carrying the dead animal, would have met with what he called an electric cloud, which sounds like
that was a curious
which sounds
term.
like a 60s band.
Yes.
in which it was kept in a state approaching to a partial fluidity or viscosity, which sounds a little like he's really just like the kid that didn't read the book for the book report. But he's basically saying, yeah, tornado and a dead pig, more or less. And I love the electric cloud because, again, I'm no meteorologist, but just what is the physics of a cloud, a rain cloud, or something similar transporting 2-inch long pieces of meat?
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't seem like it would work, does it?
Forrest and Scott, thank you for supporting their sponsors. I'm Sam. Now back to the show.
Well, let's talk about this one in Kensington, Massachusetts in 1841.
It happened like a month after the Tennessee event. Now, what's interesting, a couple of things are interesting about this, where the guy's like, it rained blood for 2 miles. And the sky was, and he's writing like Edgar Allan Poe. He's very descriptive, but he doesn't mention anyone's name. In the other accounts, they're like, this was witnessed by Mr. So-and-so and D.S. Dew, and who came upon the scene and witnessed the blah, blah, blah. This guy's got nothing to say about any people. And the other thing to remember is this, and I'm not saying this didn't happen because I don't know, but the Boston Post published a piece after the Tennessee event where they said, I'll just read it. This was published in a newspaper. It is stated in the Post of Boston that several worthies in the vicinity of that learned city have construed the mysterious shower into a judgment from heaven, designed to warn the slaveholding states of the iniquity of their traffic in flesh and blood. Others regard it as a presage of a most terrible war, but a third party connect it in some inexplicable way with the fulfillment of certain prophecies of the Revelations. So in other words, people are still looking at this like a metaphor, like, yep, in the same way that William Lloyd Garrison was like, yeah, whew, after the Turner insurrection, man, blood's fixing to fall on you guys, look out. So if there happened to be a rain of blood the next month in, an abolitionist state, a free state like Massachusetts, or like if they were, I may be wrong on that count, that would be a sort of timely antidote, wouldn't it, to given the Southern ownership class's anxieties of another slave insurrection. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. The thing about the one that you just mentioned too, 2 miles, that's different.
That's
like
way different.
A circumference of 2 miles. Yeah, that's way different from the other ones. And maybe that's an outlier. And there was definitely, and we've seen this through the history of our show, there's definitely a lot of bandwagon stories that come out about things.
Yeah.
There's this momentum to them, and and the way that journalism's working.
There's also good evidence, of course, when you do get something that's maybe too descriptive. And again, I hate to be that person where it's like the Bigfoot photo is too clear or it's too blurry. There's got to be a sweet spot here in the descriptions, and where this case is, what you're talking about here in the letters, I think, to the editors here. From the unnamed narrator, it's very descriptive. And so what I like about it is that you get more of a description of like what really happened. What was the sky like? Well, it was like a sea of fire, and it grew more bright until about a 5:15, and then it became burnished. And then it's very descriptive. It's like, that's what we want. And so he's
it's
giving
very
you
pretty.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's dramatic. It's
very
it's
dramatic.
a spectacle to behold, rather than just like, there's this weird red cloud came over, and then we were covered in blood, and it got real gross from there. And so what you're seeing here is you're giving people what they want. So one of the red flags that Scott and I seem to pick up on with some anecdotes is when someone is describing something and it seems kind of beyond the pale. For example, when somebody's describing poltergeist activity, it's like every board in the entire Victorian mansion came apart and the nails came out.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, maybe that could happen in a small case, and not saying that it's not possible in a larger case, and that it just doesn't fit the usual pattern. So what we have here, what you're saying is that,
like, it's being oversold.
Which also happens with experiencers sometimes who we've concluded completely with no basis in actual investigation,
Right.
But it seems a little bit like sometimes a thing happens and then the person still wants people to believe them, so they continue to talk about more things happening that didn't actually happen. They really only had the first event, but they're trying to continue to convince people that the first event was real, so they say other things happened too.
Yeah, it's more of a human nature thing, but something at the kernel here is a real thing. Like many legends and fables, there is a real...
Still doesn't mean the first thing isn't real.
Well, again, and you can be surprised, like what we were surprised by the Pied Piper of Hamelin. It's like, oh no, a bunch of kids really did go missing under very strange circumstances. They were mystified for hundreds of years afterwards, to the fact that we still celebrate it today. Not celebrate the going the missing, but we keep it alive in memory. Well, now it's a festival. And so, and that's another thing. You don't have any Kentucky meat shower or meat shower festivals. Because when I first thought of it, it's like, was like cubes of prime rib? Is like, that's so you collect as much as you can and kind of rinse it off, and there you go. It's free meat.
That's starting to tie in with one of my creaky working theories, or something that I like to think about these events. I'm interested in early Christian writings, and people who are textual critics of early Christian writings will say things like, the stuff you read that doesn't actually make sense is probably closer to the original. And once it starts to like be sort of wallpapered over and consistent and, makes logical sense, that's probably added later.
I believe that things, some of the things that people experience and that are close, that we know and trust, have described things that are so, I mean, not beyond the pale where it involves, entire counties or stuff, like an airport exploding, whatever it is, like that seems a little bit too much. Or But the weirdness of it can be, I think, true in that maybe it's we're talking about the expenditure of energy here, in that we're not seeing a meat shower that covered the whole state. It's localized. It's a large patch, larger than I think maybe several people could, with buckets of animal renderings could spread over a field.
You.
That's right. It's too much for a hoax like that, for what's witnessed afterwards.
That's like the gigantic crop circles.
Yeah, and also, again, a point that was brought up before, it's like, well, if you're talking about slaves who are going to put one over on the master and get at somebody's over religiosity and you're going to play this prank on them, it's like, that's a pretty dangerous prank for somebody who's in a precarious situation from being beaten and tortured and killed. Anyway, like, why would you risk that? It seems like, and again, nobody came forward in some of these reports. I think in one report, they said that the slaves did fess up and claimed it was a hoax, and then that was retracted.
I had questions about that, though. No, and Tom, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, did they, did they confess? Or you could say whatever you want.
I don't know if they did or not, but here's what I know happened. You had some extremely racist articles talking about how it was a hoax without anything other than just, hey, let's all forget about this thing because it didn't really happen. And then, like I said, that medical journal actually said, oh, they confessed to it being a hoax. And then literally everyone in Lebanon said, nope, it happened.
Yeah.
All the white people rose up and said, no, and I probably Dr. Troost too. I think I can imagine the phone calls. No one had a phone, but I can imagine them getting chewed out and saying, no, we genuinely believe this happened. I will also say that Nat Turner's murdered owner was deemed as being too indulgent, and and Achilles Chandler in Tennessee was also deemed as being too indulgent. And it's interesting that his name was a corruption of Achilles. And we know that Achilles, who I also believe was a Homeric character, had a weak spot in his ankle when he was dipped into the river that made him invulnerable. So that's just a weird thing that got stuck in my brain.
When you look at this one for in October, late October near Halloween, 1843, in Lawrence, South Carolina, this is a prominent one.
They're out picking cotton and it rains on them. It rains meat. And varying from the size of an ounce ball to larger than a hen's egg, and they were very moist and as red as blood or anything else could make them. And the grass and the cotton and everything they came into contact with was stained, as with blood. And this dispersion is very similar to the Tennessee event. It's 20 or 30 yards wide, 50 yards in length, but they didn't even trace it the whole way. And then, of course, neighbors show up. And they said this: we were so lucky as to find some of the article still remaining, and all agreed that it had the appearance of flesh of the finest mold, much finer than we had ever seen before. Some of the pieces seemed to be entirely fat, but most of it lean, very red, and somewhat transparent when held up to the light. Now, what's interesting about this, guys, is that the size of the meat, the thinness, almost as if it were thinly sliced, the fact that some of it is fat, no one ever mentions bone. It's never bone.
Right. I was going to say, it was
bone never comes up.
If it was just wholly ground, you would get, well, even in your ground beef, sometimes you get a little chip of bone, and it seems to have been stripped from the bone. So whatever the process is, if natural, it seems to be, I don't know. Well, again, it doesn't seem natural to me that you would get this kind of rendering.
No. And when you have later, it hasn't happened yet, but when you have natural, sort of quotidian explanations, it doesn't quite work. It's the idea of like, there was a rain of fish, but they were all one kind of fish. Yeah. And it's like, are water spouts discriminate? I don't think so. Right. So it doesn't quite work. But the description of the fall, the area of the fall, and the way that the meat is described and the way it's described falling, very consistent. And now it's sort of establishing a pattern.
Right.
And they heard it falling again. Remember, the slaves talked about it rattling like hail. And the younger son called to the others and said, listen, because he could hear something falling. And then they came over and they found it on the ground. So that happened in Lawrence, South Carolina on October 28th, 1843. But there was just one letter. There wasn't any investigation. These were white people. There wasn't any hue and cry. They were just like, oh, that's weird. And, life went on.
Paranormal apathy.
Apathy. So It talks about the kid who originally saw it. And it says at the end of the article, the younger William Inlow, a very intelligent and credible youth of 14, says he first heard a few scattering pieces fall and looking up, saw the sky darkened with them and that it looked something like snow falling slowly when the flakes are far apart, but that the pieces fell more rapidly. The shower fell about the middle of the day while the sun was shining and a few light clouds were in the atmosphere, but nothing visible could be assigned as the cause for the phenomenon. That is a whole lot of information. And once again, we're talking about snow or hail falling, as if they're almost in slow motion.
Also, it's very specific. It rings to me that rings specific. Like I am talking about something I saw that I can't explain, as opposed to trying to blind you with this fantastical thing. It's like, okay, here's what it looked like. It did this and this, but it didn't do that. That's what it seems truthful, I guess.
Not only that, it's consistent with every other report of flesh fall in terms of the size, the dispersal, it being compared to snow or hail, the fact that the sky was clear, which is an important point because the explanations are about to show up. It was a perfectly normal, natural event.
Right. On a clear day. Clear day.
Yeah. This was a clear day.
Well, let's talk about this one in Clinton, North Carolina, a town that I have passed through at least 100 times, if not 300 to 500, going back and forth to the beach when I was a kid.
This happened in Wilson County, about 15 miles outside of, I think it's southeast of Clinton, on a farm of Thomas M. Clarkson. He writes to the newspaper, the Fayetteville, North Carolinian. He writes the newspaper. And his account has what I was going to title my book if I ever wrote about this. I'll just read you his account. It's very quick. On the 15th February 1850, there fell within 100 yards of the residence of Thomas M. Clarkson in Sampson County a shower of flesh and blood about 30 feet wide and, as far as it was traced, about 250 or 300 yards in length. The pieces appeared to be flesh, liver, lights or lungs, brains, and blood. Some of the blood ran on the leaves, apparently very fresh. 3 of his children were in it and ran to their mother, exclaiming, "Mother, there is meat falling." Their mother went immediately to see, but the shower was over, and there lay the flesh, etc. Neil Campbell, Esquire, was living close by, was on the spot shortly after it fell, and pronounced it as above. One of his children was about 150 yards from the shower and came running to the rest, saying he smelt something like blood. During the time it was falling, there was a cloud overhead having a red appearance, like a wind cloud. There was no rain. And he sends samples to the North Carolinian, and they write, "What the hell? No one is interested in this. No one cares." Right. And we looked at this stuff with 2 of the best microscopes in the place, and this is crazy. But no one cares. And that's the end of it, except later somebody goes, it's vomiting buzzards.
Right.
Turkey buzzards eat too much, and then they vomit. Now, this is true based on what I know, that buzzards will vomit as a defense mechanism. Sometimes if they've eaten too much, they lighten their load.
Yeah.
No one says a word about buzzards. And of course, these people are on a farm. They saw buzzards every single day.
For the record, I see turkey vultures every day. I see them every day now, and I see them feasting on things. I have not seen any piles of raw meat around. There's a couple of regulars in my neighborhood. I could almost give them names. And but I've never seen them like throwing up or...
Yeah. Have you ever witnessed a meat shower?
No, I have not.
No. Or is it like a raptor pellet, where usually that's a small animal swallowed whole that, of course, they can't digest the feathers and the bones, so they cough that up later. You're talking about the volume here, though. I mean, it would have to be a massive football field flock of birds.
Vomiting.
vomiting all in unison. But it does, this description also, though, matches the other, the dispersal in that it's a narrow but long.
It's a rectangle.
Field. Yeah, exactly. And that as this cloud is going over, it's releasing its payload and then just kind of fizzles out like it's done. Almost as if the cloud itself, unlike rain, where you have the cloud and then it drops rain, but there's still the cloud. And the cloud can go hundreds of miles, away and drop more rain. And that the cloud itself is the meat and the viscera. And that as it goes, it just kind of falls. And it's not coming from something other than there's a ball of it itself. So how did it get there? What's containing it? And then what's making it drop?
And what is it again? Small pieces.
Yeah.
Like offal, brains, liver, always liver, lights like lungs. No bones, no hooves, no ears, no eyes, no snouts, no tails. Now, I don't know, are buzzards really picky? Do they just go for, and I'm saying this genuinely out of ignorance, do they just go for the liver first? And then if they all were up there vomiting, would every little piece of meat that they ate only be 1.5 inches long? I don't see them as being that discriminating. But this is the first time we've seen the vomiting buzzard explanation. It will not be the last.
I mean, yeah, I guess that'll come up again. We did actually wind up studying during our series on the missing 411. I actually got a book, which I have right back here on my bookcase, that is a guide for finding missing persons in the mountains. And one of the things, it has a whole chapter in it on how far predators spread remains, including birds. And guess what? It's not far. And as it applied to the missing 411 with these folks that disappeared and their remains were found miles and miles and miles from their last known position, and their clothes were folded neatly on a log nearby or whatever. It's like, there is no, people are like, oh, well, the predator scattered. It's like, nope, it's generally, if I remember correctly, it's like maybe 50 yards from wherever the thing died.
I was just thinking about
no
this.
No matter what animal it is.
Exactly.
Nothing is dragging it off more than that really great distance.
Right. And so when you look at the data, especially the national parks, and, people were writing us back saying like, you idiots, like this is not a big deal, when most of the cases of people being found or remains and deaths reported are listed as cause unknown. And people say, well, you found a jawbone, but you don't know how the person died. My point is like, okay, valid, but you found a jawbone of somebody, but not the rest of them? Like, where's the rest of them? How did if you do find the rest of them, how did that jawbone get 8 miles away?
Right. That's the part that doesn't track.
That's the thing of like, people like, well, it could be an animal. Yeah, it could be a bear.
Animals aren't keeping trophies, and they aren't taking something that far to eat it.
Right. So how does it get into the state it is, and what lifts it up into the air? And so all the other prosaic explanations here of whirlwinds, electric clouds, which I think maybe you were saying was just charged with lightning, perhaps, or having some kind of anti-gravity property here. Yeah, which now again, as we say, the other thing is sometimes the mundane explanation gets more preposterous than the preposterous explanation. What we have here is this something that's really happening, but nothing is satisfied. As that one letter said, the people of Lebanon were unsatisfied with that answer.
But you've got, buzzards, they're big, they eat dead things, and they puke. Cool, and they fly. So this seems to tick a lot of boxes if you didn't happen to be there. None of the eyewitnesses talk about buzzards.
Right.
The paper that published that explanation, the Wilmington Courier, end their piece with this: if the bones of some animal or animals, horse, cow, or sheep, robbed of their fleshy covering, are not found somewhere not far from the scene of the shower after a strict search, we recant the above and go back to the point, don't know.
Yes, I love that closing line.
Even they know, like, this is a bit of a stretch.
Right.
And it's definitely a thing where you sort of have to ignore the eyewitnesses in order to make it work.
Yeah, exactly.
And then again, my other point is we still have buzzards.
Right.
And you have buzzards in your neighborhood. And so one would expect there to be a shower of flesh. Maybe they fly super high and they're super, like the U-2 spy plane, and they're vomiting. You don't even see them. Then we would have rains of meat.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's your point from earlier. It would keep happening, or some form of it, or to, I don't know, to be fair to whom, but there are some cases of other things showing up or falling. I'll just mention this in case it has to be mentioned at some point. The Oakville blobs from 1994, Oakville, Washington,
Yes.
where they're gelatinous blobs. Again, different
Clear.
in matter, but okay, in modern times, we have reports that get more outrageous. They don't pare down more like, oh, some stuff fell from the sky. It's easy to figure out. Maybe if that was frogs or fish where people don't really report that, or even mass throngs of dead birds, which is unusual. That really shouldn't happen in this case. We don't know why, but just 400 birds suddenly died and fell in one spot. And you have more scientific explanations for those. Now, we're not talking about that here.
Attribute to lightning.
Yeah, Oakville here, it gets even more crazy and wild, where people say that the blobs made them sick. They continue to. Men in Black showed up after the reporting of the blobs. Some of the blobs, or maybe all of them at first, were in one report cited that there were human white blood cells in them, but later reporting, I guess, or looking under a microscope from the Washington State Public Health Department proved that there was no nuclei in the cells and that they were of different sizes. There was no structure. It was, I think, one article here says microbiologist Mike McDowell. He was on Unsolved Mysteries in 1997. He talked about it, and he said there was no structure that they could see with a microscope. So there was another theory that it was perhaps macerated, chunked up pieces of jellyfish that were falling down.
Oh,
and that
okay.
kind of eliminates that. So in tying with the bits of meat here falling down, they did have microscopes, or some of the stuff was looked under magnification.
Yes.
But they did not have the, of course, all of the technology that we have today to kind of figure this out. But I would guess or bet that if they did, it would still be inconclusive, as are the white blob story here, that, there's some creatures, but that the two types of animals or living things that would yield or would be similar to what fell in Oregon are bacteria and archaea. So not actual types of organisms that people would think that they are, or that they're, beings from outer space perhaps, but they're something that was sloughed off somehow. And so what you're seeing here with the meat is that, okay, now it's pretty much, they know what it is. It is identifiable meat, but I wish we had a sample to analyze today. But again, on the other hand, I knew if we did, I would bet to anything that if they got that, it would still be inconclusive, because that's how these things end.
Let me tell you this as a teaser. As the century progresses, the microscopes start coming out in force, right?
Right.
In the 1850 North Carolina event, they're like, we looked at this with two of the best microscopes in the place, and I'm like, that they were boasting. But it should not surprise you that as the century progresses and some of this stuff is looked at by biologists and people whose job it is to know this stuff, the actual identity of the samples being examined becomes pretty difficult to identify. And there are some wildly divergent, like somebody says it's this and somebody says it's that. And it's a horse, it's a fish, and stuff you would think that it would be kind of basic. But even though you have a microscope and you can look at it and examine it quite closely, it's like, that doesn't necessarily give you a better idea of what it is. And that's why this is still a very sort of wonderful and mysterious thing to me. It's not like, it was a cow.
Absolutely. And it is a UFO, because like that story of the guy in Florida who is this is one of my favorite anecdotes. And I don't know why, but I tend to believe this guy. He was in a documentary that, this guy is a semi-pro photographer, and his specialty is celestial photography. So he's got a powerful telescope hooked up to a DSLR, a digital high-end camera, and he sees a UFO off the coast, from his deck in Florida, hovering over the ocean, and he immediately grabs his camera. It's already set up because he was, usually photographing the stars and planets. And this thing is kind of fuzzy and out of focus. It's like, perfect opportunity. I got a telescope with a DSLR high-res camera on it. He dials this thing in, takes a photo. It's still blurry. That is the takeaway of all the phenomena. You can look even more closely with better equipment. It's still going to be inconclusive and blurry.
And this seems like such a maximally materialistic phenomenon where it's like, it's meat, it's fat, it's blood. And then someone's like, actually, it's not blood. there's so much I could say about it. I wish that I was an expert on slaughterhouses in the 18th century or the 19th century, because what was that like before it was centralized production? And I haven't even studied the meteorological history of the places that have, like, did these events happen after tornadoes? But, guys, you know what it's like to run rabbits. You could just lose your mind. But the people who are on the ground and really trying to explain it were also running rabbits. So we'll just watch them do it, I guess.
So would you agree that given all the research you had to do to get all this information together, all the digging you had to do in modern times with computers and the internet and even microfiche back when you started this, or in the libraries and all the assistance that you got, do you think it's possible that all of these folks are reporting these events that are so similar across, 30 plus American bloodfalls? Do you think that folks were just copycatting, or does that seem highly unlikely to you? Because they would have had to read every small, tiny newspaper, or there's no way, right?
A couple of things come to mind immediately. The first is some of these stories got picked up in the newspapers and were widely the Tennessee event caused quite a flap, quite a commotion.
Right. And of course, Nat Turner,
yes, it did. And it was like, it rained blood, and look what he did with that. Now, in terms of the details of events, I don't know. In a few of these letters to the paper, you do have people who are aware. For example, at Benicia, this is the sixth one of these events on record. And Professor Troost published a bunch of weird rains, mostly that had happened in Europe.
Right.
Some people are aware of one or two other events, but they'll get the details wrong or the state wrong. Other people are very obviously not aware at all. And they're like, this is a singular occurrence. I can't believe it. Other people go like, well, it's often talked about. And so the question arises, are these hoaxes? Why in the world would an army major pretend to be hit by a piece of meat? Any of these people, really? What is that like Frank Venable said about the Chatham County event? If a hoax has been perpetrated, an object seems lacking. And the newspapers will say, like, it doesn't make sense why somebody would, like, cut up a bunch of meat and say it rained. And so I can't say that they didn't know, but we can be all around the world and travel 200 years in the past by a few strokes of a keyboard. And these people had no access. So they might know things that happened in California if they're in California and they refer to events that happened, the previous year. Sure, they know about that. But they're not going to know about stuff that happened unless it became really famous. But one of the things that struck me immediately about Rains of Blood and Meat is that people wanted very much to forget them. They did not want to enshrine them. They did not want to canonize them. They wanted to say, it was a whirlwind, it was a flock of buzzards, we got to go because it's gross and awful and it might mean something terrible. And so there was no compiled body of this that people could refer to and go like, this happened. And, they might know a little bit. So I'll give you a qualified answer to say, yes, some of them knew some of it. None of them knew all of it.
Okay.
Well, no, here's the thing I want to bring up because this is fascinating to me. So the guy that wrote this letter to the Fayetteville, North Carolinian, Thomas M. Clarkson, when it rained meat on his farm, he was about 39. He was a house painter, I believe. On April 20th, 1861, when he was 49, he enlisted as a musician in Company A, 30th North Carolina Infantry Regiment. And for those of you who don't know, North Carolina gave up about a quarter of the casualties in the Civil War because we had, I think, fewer plantations. And so there were more boys to feed into that terrible maw. He was reported absent wounded or absent sick through December 1862. He saw some really nasty combat, but he did survive the war. His son, I think it's the son who smelt it and was close to it. His name was Thomas N. Clarkson. He also enlisted in the Confederacy when he was 22, and he died of pneumonia on November 14th, 1862. The reason I bring it up is because there is another fall that happened the following year that also involved people who would end up serving in the Civil War.
Right. That's the August 1851 in California?
Yeah, at Fort Benicia, which is, I guess, just outside of San Francisco. And there's not a heck of a lot. I think there's one report on it, and it says, on Saturday, the 20th, a shower of meat fell at the Army station near Benicia. It was first observed by Major Allen, who was struck by one of the falling pieces. The shower lasted 2 or 3 minutes. This is also consistent with other reports. The pieces were from the size of a pigeon's egg to that of an orange, the heaviest perhaps weighing 3 ounces. No birds were visible in the air at the time. Specimens of this meat, which is apparently beef, were preserved by Major Allen and the surgeon of the post. A piece that was examined 3 hours after it fell showed a portion of a small blood vessel, some of the sheath of a muscle and a muscular fiber. It was slightly tainted. The ground upon which the shower fell was about 300 yards long and 80 wide. Again, a big rectangle.
Mm-hmm.
And the entire amount of meat between 2.5 and 5 bushels in bulk. No pieces of bone were found. A strong wind from the west was blowing at the time, and the skies were clear. This is the third occurrence of the kind of record in the last 6 years. The theories heretofore in vogue as to the cause of such phenomena, read vomiting buzzards, would seem to be negatived by the accounts given in this instance. We trust the surgeon of the post will publish his observations on the subject, both for the benefit of science and the satisfaction of public curiosity. Believe me, fellas, I looked. There was no observations posted by the surgeon of the post, who, had he lived, would have undoubtedly served in the Confederacy because he was a very pedigreed Southern boy. But here's the thing.
Right.
Major Robert Allen, who was struck by a piece of falling meat, was not some crackpot. He rose through the ranks and then during the Civil War attained the brevet rank of Major General and went on to serve as Chief Quartermaster of the Pacific for the Union Army. So the one guy in North Carolina serves and his son serves and dies of pneumonia. This guy, and both of them got rained on. And then this guy becomes quite the muckety-muck in the Union Army.
You think there might be some symbolic connection there?
I mean, if for no other reason than the variety of the people who witness the events, they unite people. And they unite people who would normally not be united because of their color or their race or their station in life. And these events unite them. And especially when we get into the blood aspect of it, I think there's something much deeper happening. It's a kind of a spiritual connection that's happening. But I do want to point out that the way that this event is described at Benicia is entirely consistent with Sampson County, North Carolina, and Lebanon, Tennessee, and Lawrence, South Carolina, in terms of duration, area of effect, size of the pieces of meat, weight, and the kind of meat that fell.
When this happens, there are bigger things to consider that for the people of the time really encapsulated, I think, was a parable of their what to make of their behavior at the time, their spirituality, what to believe in. Where did this come from? Is this just as we get into the age of more science and scientific exploration and the age of industry and mechanical inventions that are coming on board here, should we look at it with that lens and those tools? Or is this something that's deeper, as happened in millennia past, that no, this is a metaphor, this is an allegory, whatever you want to term it, like this is something bigger than what it is. And now when we look at something like this that happens, it's like, why are the men in black showing up? Are there UFOs involved? We look at it through a much different lens.
Can I leave you with a quote that I think is relevant? Because this completely blew my mind when I read it. And it's from an essay by Paul Edward Dutton, and it's called Observations on Early Medieval Weather in General, Bloody Rain in Particular. This lets you know what a hit I am at parties. And this is what he wrote. He said, there's a difference between climate and weather, okay? Climate exists without us. Weather is the atmosphere in contact with us and exists when we engage it physically and think about it. To study the weather is to study the human.
That's going to wrap up episode 291 of Astonishing Legends. A very warm thank you to our special guest, Tom Maxwell. Use of the song Hell by Thomas Maxwell, licensed through Warner Chappell Music, all rights reserved. The summer's drawing to a close and the spooky season is nigh, so we're happy to announce that we're back to our regular bi-weekly schedule. Look for part 2 of this series, September 28th, 2024.
Find and subscribe to the other shows from the Astonishing Legends Network, The Midnight Library, Scared All the Time, and Richard Hadam's Paranormal Bookshelf. We have links to all of them in our show notes. Our show is edited by Sarah Voorhees-Wendell at VW Sound and co-produced by Tess Feifel, who is also head of research and the social media manager. Our technical producer is Ed Vocola, or as we call him, the Mechanic. Special thanks to our announcer, John Bolin.
Hi, I'm Zenuel.
This is Trish. Trish.
My name is spelled Sam, S-A-M.
Hello, Scott Philbrook. Or Forrest Burgess.
In Cairo, Illinois.
Or whoever edits these.
Our theme, which is available as a ringtone, was composed by Judson Crane at foundermusic.com. All other music and sound design for the show is composed and created by Alan Carestia.
Our logo was created by Tommy Beaver Design, and our animated graphics for social media and YouTube are done by Joshua Sloan at deadstreetproductions.com.
Many episodes have transcripts available. For ones that don't, you can request them by emailing transcripts@astonishinglegends.com.
Astonishing Legends would not be possible without you, our listeners. Visit our store at astonishinglegends.com or interact with us and other listeners on Instagram, Twitter, Discord, Facebook, and YouTube.
You can also visit us at patreon.com/astonishinglegends, where patrons have access to commercial-free versions of the show and additional bonus content, including the Patreon-exclusive show, The Astonishing Junk Drawer. If you're new to Patreon, you can save money by signing up on the web through a browser or using an Android device rather than Apple's App Store, where Apple is now charging a 30% markup on signups through iOS. No part of this show may be reproduced anywhere without permission. Copyright Astonishing Legends Productions.
Good night.